Welcome to Uncharted Liverpool, where we're going to delve into some of the more interesting and less well-known parts of Liverpool history. In this podcast, we're going to take a deep dive into some of the more obscure, little-known, and sometimes just plain weird parts of Scouse history and heritage. Full disclosure, I'm a Scouser. I was born in Liverpool in the late 80s, and in my possibly biased opinion, it's one of the best cities in this country, if not the world. But aside from me loving the city I grew up in, it has some of the richest, most interesting and culturally significant histories of all the cities in the UK. The city has played an important part in the world as we know it today, sometimes for amazing reasons, sometimes world-changing, but sometimes the part it played was dark, abhorrent and shameful. We will be looking at the good, the bad, the ugly, and the uncharted part of the history of Liverpool. This is Uncharted Liverpool. You may know Bluecoat, or simply Bluecoat, today as being an art centre in the middle of the city centre, just off Church Street, but the origins of one of Liverpool's most interesting buildings stretches right back to the 1700s, when the Bluecoat was founded as a school. Originally designed to be a charity school to help the poorer and orphaned children of the area, the Bluecoat ran as intended all the way up until 1906, when the school changed locations. But to understand the origins and history of the building a little better, we need to take you right back to the earliest years of the 1700s. Britain at the time was still suffering the after effects of the English Civil War that radically changed how the country worked. Poverty was rife, and although Acts of Parliament, such as the Poor Law, tried to make sure that poor and destitute families had basic needs, such as shelter and clothing, in reality the country was struggling with the number of people not receiving even the basic requirements to sustain a life. Liverpool, as we know it today, could be said to have developed during the period of difficulty. After years of civil unrest, increasing poverty, a massive change in historical hierarchy and family status, the time seemed to come for the middle class to pursue wealth in a way they weren't able to do before. There was a shift in attitudes after this period of wealth collection towards philanthropy and public cause. In 1699, an Act of Parliament created a new parish of Liverpool, and as a result, a new church was needed. St. Peter's was built on Church Street, not too far from where the Bluecoat would be built, and was demolished in 1922. It was the rector, Robert Scythe, along with local mariner Brian Blundell, who were the two leading figures in the founding of the Bluecoat. Between 1708 and 1709, the first school on the site was realised after fundraising efforts by the two founders. A round of fundraising collected subscribers who were willing to commit a yearly financing to the school in order to pay for building materials, staff, and food for the children studying there. The importance of religion and philanthropy often went hand in hand, the thinking being that if you were blessed with money, God had done so in order to allow you to help the more needy. Over the course of Brian Blundell's life, he would give £3,500 to the school, around a tenth of what he'd earned during his lifetime, according to some historians. As we might expect from Liverpool history, there's a fairly large link between funding for the school and the transatlantic slave trade. A large portion of the initial funding for the Bluecoat came from Brian Blundell himself. We must obviously ask, given Liverpool's history and involvement in the slave trade, how much funding for the Bluecoat came from dealing in slavery. Relatively recent research has determined that for donations between 1714 and 1725, and the most consistent sponsors of the school in that time period, that 65% of the funds were from profits made dealing in slavery. Not only is the financial side of the school troubling, but the Bluecoat eventually became a bit of a social hub for people involved or interested in the slave trade, as large numbers of sponsors and donors all visited the school on many occasions for social events or fundraising efforts. It essentially became a networking opportunity among the elite who met there. As Gavin Davenport mentioned in Bluecoat Liverpool, a book on the building, it is reasonable to presume, as a whole, that the many subscribers to the Bluecoat over the years operated somewhere between the poles of outright philanthropy and social and commercial opportunism. The physical premises allowed the sea merchants of Liverpool to form bonds and business dealings that would last throughout the century, and the ongoing part Liverpool had to play in the transatlantic slave trade. Interestingly, it formed part of a slaving vicious circle. Often, the young boys who were schooled at the Bluecoat went to work in apprenticeships for those traders, who often funded the school, eventually becoming part of the industry, which afforded them their education and keep. After the first school was built in 1708-1709, it soon became evident that the relatively small premises were becoming a bit overcrowded. The school had taken about 50 pupils in its early years, both boys and girls, but Liverpool was rapidly growing and its population of needy children ever increasing. Couple this with Brian Blundell's desire to impress his Christian ideals on kids, even after their schooling had finished for the day. Only a few years after opening, it was decided that expansion was needed in order to accommodate more children and staff, both as day students and for boarding facilities. Whilst we're here, let's quickly discuss why it's called a Bluecoat. It's not a reference to Pontins. Bluecoat schools are generally charity-based schools that sprang up in the 16th century, borrowing their name from the colour of the uniform that the pupils often wore. Blue has commonly been thought of as the colour of charity, and so when first examples of charity schools were founded in 1552, Christ's Hospital in London chose blue for the children's uniforms. Thereafter, charity schools who used blue uniforms were known as Bluecoats. The Liverpool Bluecoat was one of around 60 that had existed in the UK and Ireland over the years. The links between schooling, charity and religion wasn't unique to Liverpool. The concept for the school borrowed largely from an organisation known as the Society for Promotion of Christian Knowledge, which started out mostly as a Christian publishing company in the North American colonies. The organisation provided books and literature to the Bluecoat schools in the UK and used their profits to invest in Christian missionary work around the world. If you need any further proof, next time you're in town, look up at the face of the Bluecoat and you'll see a Latin inscription along the front. I don't know about you, but my Latin skills range on the scale between rusty and non-existent. So the English translation for all of us who don't read Roman talk is dedicated to the promotion of Christian charity and the training of poor children in the principles of the Anglican Church, founded in the year of salvation, 1717. In 1711, the school as we know it today was designed. The foundations of the building were laid in 1716, just as Liverpool's Old Dock was completed in 1715. The world's first commercial wet dock ensured even higher profits for the subscribers to the Bluecoat, and profits made were often reinvested in the new building. One of the original features of the building was a ship-shaped weather vane on the main facade, showing the strong link between the docks and the school. It swallowed nearby dwellings and expanded significantly, actually larger than was needed, so much so that the excess space was rented out to various organisations, and another free grammar school was set up within the building to help those who weren't fortunate to get places at the now desirable Bluecoat. The new building has largely survived, at least in style, to this day. There was some damage during the bombings of the Second World War, but over the years, efforts to maintain the original Queen Anne style of the Bluecoat has mostly succeeded. As an architectural geeky side note, it's worth mentioning one of the more quirky features of the building's current layout. If you walk into the Bluecoat from the main entrance and pass through to the courtyard and look back towards the way you entered, you'll notice that the wall is curved. Originally, this wall was normal, straight wall, but oddly for the time, the curved wall was put in instead in order to expand the space inside. Bluecoat carried on until 1906, when it vacated the premises to move to nearby Wavertree. The turn of the 20th century brought Liverpool into light as the second city of the UK, and the needs of the school changed somewhat, eventually becoming a selective grammar school. Initially, the trustees of the building didn't seem concerned about its future, but this was short-lived. The City Council seemed to favour demolition and to build commercial buildings on the site, whilst others suggested it become a transport hub of some variety, linking Liverpool to Manchester. Edwardian Britain seemed to favour new developments rather than investment in conservation, and Liverpool suffered along with the rest of the country. Suddenly, it seemed the Bluecoat might be in danger, but somehow it managed to reach the beginning of the First World War without any drastic decisions being made, largely thanks to a group of bohemian, free thinkers and artists who call themselves the Sandon Society. The society was based in Sandon Terrace, forming the group soon after the university made some decisions on its art programme that many didn't accept. The Sandon Society formed an independent art school which focused on artists and their apprentices working together, and when their old premises were demolished, they relocated themselves into the Bluecoat building on School Lane. The society favoured experimental and local art rather than popular art at the time, which they considered to be too commercial, and accused museums and galleries of being stuck in their ways, only displaying pieces that they think would raise the most money. They were especially angry when the Liverpool Council awarded the contract to pay frescoes in Liverpool's town hall to London-based artist studios rather than local ones, saying, "It's ridiculous in our view that the destiny of Liverpool art should be at the mercy of the butcher, the baker and the candlestick maker, as it would be to place in the hands of an artist the control of the tramway system." Another disagreement between the local authority and the university brought Charles Riley, Professor of Architecture, to be interested in the Bluecoat. He failed to get funds from the university to move there, and turned to his friend, the Mersey-famous soap magnate William Lever, for help in doing so. He pleaded with Lever to invest in the lease on the building, with an eventual option to buy. In doing so, he renamed the building as the Liberty Buildings. The years leading up to the war was a mix of compromise, disagreement and argument between these three invested parties: the Sandon Society, Riley and Lever. Not always on the same page, the society wanted to create a hub of free-thinking artists who would eventually become trustees on the building, whilst Lever had other plans, intending the building to become more of a commercial enterprise in art, rivaling already established organisations in London. Riley was caught somewhere in the middle of this. In 1913, when the option to buy came up, Lever, apparently as part of his lease agreement, had promised to offer the building rent-free to the university for the architecture department, or to donate $25,000 to help fund premises elsewhere. When the university accepted the cash offer, apparently at Riley's dismay, it threw the building's future back into doubt, since its only tenants were now the Sandon Society. They felt abused and betrayed by the deal, especially since they were under the impression that everyone was on the same page to keep the building functioning as some kind of art centre, even if they didn't entirely agree on the details. Enter stage left, Fanny Calder. Calder came from a very well respected family, the daughter of James Lister, who quit publicly from his job as a cotton broker at his disgust of the gambling and option scheme being introduced, and his view that they were destroying and morally bankrupting the industry. He became interested in promoting charities and local causes, and it seemed Fanny picked up the same ideals along the way. Calder was so distraught at what the university and Riley had agreed to do, she stepped in to negotiate the Sandon's ideals with Lever himself. However, with the war about to start, Lever didn't commit to anything, and she knew that Lever's involvement was still required, as public donors and fundraising efforts were not likely to sustain the building long term. The Edwardian Society of the time seemed to be falling out of favour with anything that wasn't necessary to promote business and wealth within the city. So the Sandon Society seemed to fall more and more out of favour with wealthy locals who might have been able to step in and help fund their efforts. Against all odds, it did manage to sustain itself until after the war, and as soon as things became a little less muddy, Fanny Calder once again began lobbying Lever to invest in the original proposed idea of an artistic club to promote Liverpool, but to everyone's annoyance, Lever proclaimed that he was no longer interested in the scheme, and for yet another time, the Bluecoat's future was in doubt. Lever died in 1925, and his will didn't mention the Bluecoat or his plans for it at all, so the executors of the will eventually decided to put the building up for auction and raise funds for the estate. The guide price was £40,000, so it seems inevitable now, in the post-war economic crash, that demolition was the only way forward. Many efforts were made by locals and even MPs to raise funds to buy the building back from Lever, but nothing seemed to come close to what was needed. Local papers ran stories pleading for help, but public opinion now seemed to be that on the side of preserving history. The president of the Royal Institute of British Architects at the time said, "It would be a strange anomaly if, at the very moment that Liverpool is erecting a cathedral, which is attracting worldwide attention, a building of another and earlier page in its history, of great charm and interest, should be destroyed." After some delays to the auction, on the evening prior to the final pushed back date, there was an anonymous donation of £17,100 in order to help buy the building, with the addition of a rather large mortgage on top. The sale of the building was finally completed, and the new owners were the trustees of Bluecoat Society of Arts. The official opening of what was now called Bluecoat Chambers was in 1929, and whilst ownership of the building was no longer in question, there still remained the problem of affording the upkeep and ongoing repairs to the building throughout the interwar years and even past the Second World War, when the building was damaged in bomb blasts. Various schemes were employed in order to keep the building running, including charging 6p per visitor for them to glance at Jacob Epstein's Genesis statue, a controversial sculpture of a pregnant woman which drew thousands of visitors. During the Second World War, the Walker Art Gallery was closed and requisitioned by the Ministry of Food as part of the war effort. And through a deal, Bluecoat Chambers agreed to house and display some of the Walker's collection of art, though initially disagreeing with the typical gallery and museum lack of creativity and forward thinking. They could hardly decline such an offer now. These schemes, along with funding from the War Damage Commission, allowed Bluecoat Chambers to continue independently, and by the mid-1950s, the Bluecoat became financially self-sufficient, and the future for once looked a bit brighter. In 1978, the mortgage from 1927 was finally repaid, and throughout many a turbulent decade, the Bluecoat remained a stalwart of the art community in Liverpool. Throughout its ups and downs, its many tenants and residents, and many renovations, the Bluecoat still remains against all odds. The most recent development concluded in 2008, coinciding with Liverpool being the capital of culture. So next time you're in town, head behind the Primark on Church Street and pop into the Bluecoat. There's always something being displayed in the public galleries. There's several independent shops selling their own art, and a great little cafe to grab a bite. The courtyard at the back of the main entrance is a perfect place to take a book on a sunny day and enjoy a coffee. Take a look at the curved wall and ponder that you're in Liverpool's oldest surviving building, thanks to the hard work and efforts of many forward thinkers like the Sandon Society and Fanny Calder. Just while we're here, we couldn't not mention the reports of supernatural experiences within the grounds of the Bluecoat. According to the Bluecoat's own website, there have been several occurrences over the years of people running into spectral apparitions, reports of old ladies dressed in Victorian attire standing in the garden, or the cries of children being heard along the landing, where it's believed the old punishment room of the school was once located. One night, when a caretaker called the police to investigate some alarms going off in the building, the police dog was apparently too scared to climb the stairs to the old concert hall, growling at nothingness. Especially interesting, if you believe in such things, is the mysterious case of the fiery crystal ball. In the early 80s, the Bluecoat hosted a touring exhibition called Art of the Invisible, which attempted to understand the links between the birth of abstract art and the belief of some of its spearheaders. The exhibition included a crystal ball, apparently once owned by occultist, Satanist and all-round famous evil guy, Aleister Crowley. The crystal ball sat within a glass case on a cushioned surface, and later on during the day, smoke was seen coming from the display case. It seemed Crowley's crystal had caught the sunlight from the nearby window and, magnified in conjunction with the glass case, had set fire to the cushion underneath. Crowley's act of evil from the afterlife, or just a bad accident interrupted in the nick of time, we'll leave that up to you to decide. If you're so inclined, you can search YouTube for an episode of Most Haunted from 2005, filmed within the buildings whilst Bluecoat was empty and undergoing a refurbishment. But it's not one of the Derek Acora ones, so it's not the most Liverpool-y one. So, you know. Anyway, this has been Uncharted Liverpool. Find us on Instagram and TikTok at Uncharted Liverpool, and on Twitter at Uncharted Live, where we'll be posting some photos and videos relating to this episode. Whilst researching this episode, we read Bluecoat Liverpool, the UK's first art centre, edited by Brian Briggs and John Belcham. We also read some history and spooky anecdotes from Bluecoat's own website, thebluecoat.org.uk, as well as visiting the Bluecoat's current exhibition on the history of the Bluecoat building. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next month for another story from Liverpool's past. Ta-ra!